Hey.
Well, good morning. Good to see all your smiling faces again. Um, we don't quite have sunshine here in Dallas. We woke
Oh.
up this morning to 22 degrees and a wind chill of 9.
Yes.
So it's a little chilly up here in North Texas, but
Yes.
glad to be with you. Let me first say to all of you who volunteered for the conference, thank you again. For all of you who went to the conference, thank you again. We got just a tremendous number of people who were ministered to, who felt like they were a part of it, who loved being in the midst of what we did at Strong at the Broken Places. And so if you were an active part of that, thank you so much for that. Time to dive back into chapter 4. This is the last chapter of this beautiful little book. This is where we get to what I call the realization of the covenant relationship. So we're coming full circle. We're coming back to the point where now the storyteller in this beautiful story is going to resolve all the conflict, is going to bring it all together. We're going to see redemption at its completion, at its most beautiful point. But I want to start this whole thing with a story. I've had a good friend for many, many years. You can Google him. You will understand who it is I'm talking about. His name is Michael Franzese. Sounds like a good Italian New York name, doesn't it?
Yes.
And it actually is, because he was the number 2 man in one of the New York crime families of the 1980s.
Oh.
This man, his father actually back in the 1960s was the main enforcer of the Colombo crime family. He actually holds the distinction now of being the oldest incarcerated prisoner in the United States prison system at 96. Michael's father finally got released from prison. And Michael, who was going to be a doctor, headed down the same path with his father. He became a made man, part of the mob. And the beautiful story about Michael is that through his wife and through a number of circumstances, including a jailer who threw a Bible into his prison cell while he was in solitary confinement for 4 years, Michael came to know the Lord. And his incredible testimony, I got to know him when I was in Austin, and I've got a number of funny stories related to that. But there's one significant thing that Michael used to say that relates to the story we're going to look at today. As a part of the mob, anytime there was a disagreement within the mob, they would hold what's called a sit-down. And a sit-down was intended to be the family who would come together and they would iron out their differences, hopefully without violence. They would iron out their differences so that the activities of the family could continue. And Michael said, he told me after he shared this story, I had some alone time with him, and he said, Mark, I never lost a sit down. In my entire time in the family, in the mob, I never lost a sit down. And he said it's because of these 5 things. The first is anytime I called for a sit down, I always set it up properly. I had the right people in the room. I set them in the right places. I had the right atmosphere. I set the room up in order for me to win. He said, second, I never went into a sit down without a strategy. I had not only a primary strategy, but I had a backup strategy so that I could argue any point and my strategy would unfold. I'd ultimately set the other guy up to lose. Third, I was willing to sacrifice whatever it took to win. I was willing to give it all away in order to win the ultimate battle. Finally, he said, the last 2 things was I would seal the deal. I would make sure we never left the table without me, number 1, winning, and without me, number 2, sealing the deal. And finally, he said, I went into every sit down understanding the significance of why we were there. So the setup, the strategy, the sacrifice, the seal, and the significance sounds like a great grade school theology sermon, doesn't it?
Uh-huh.
All the S's you can remember.
Say it again.
Well, yeah, it was, well, it's in your notes, actually.
Oh,
You
okay,
can
good.
see it.
Never mind.
Yeah, you can see the setup because we're going to walk through exactly. Now, I'm not calling Boaz a mobster. Just let me make sure that's really clear.
Gotcha.
But you're going to see the setup, the strategy, the sacrifice, the seal, and the significance. We're going to walk through that because it's a great parallel to exactly what Boaz is getting ready to do, because Boaz has made it very clear. In fact, in chapter 3, verse 13, he says this: "In the morning it shall be that if the other Goel will perform the duty of the close relative for you, good, let him do it. But if he does not want to perform the duty for you, then I will perform it as the Lord lives." Boaz makes this vow to Ruth, and you remember the story where we left off. She's gone to the threshing room floor. She's requested in covenant language for him to have put his protection over her. He has treated her with every bit of respect he can. He has gone above and beyond, and now he has said, as she requested, "You be my kinsman-redeemer," and all of that entails, he has said, no matter what happens, I will do it. So he has laid the foundation for this. Now, it's also interesting to note that when he says this in chapter 3, verse 13, we're going to find out that Boaz really knows who the other Goel is, the closer relative. And that's what the word Goel means, is kinsman-redeemer, but it is the closest relative. And remember, the levirate law of the day under the Abrahamic covenant was this, that when a woman's husband died, the next brother of that husband would marry her and give her children, so that you would perpetuate the name, the lineage, the family, the land. All of it would stay intact, because God was very, very specific about his care for the family and his care for the land. After all, the Abrahamic covenant says you're going to have land, seed, blessing forever. And a levirate marriage was one of the provisions God made for a widow. It was a provision God made to hold true to the Abrahamic covenant of land, seed, blessing. How long?
Forever.
Forever. So God held a very, very high value on family, lineage, land, keeping it in the family. So what we're going to unfold here is exactly what Boaz does when Ruth comes to him and says, "Be my Goel." He does it in covenant, in the right covenant language. And he comes back and he says, remember, there's also another Goel. Let's see if he's going to do it. What we really are going to find out is that he absolutely knows this other Goel, and he knows he's not going to do it. He knows his character, and we're going to unfold that here in just a minute. So we're now in this realization of the covenant relationship, and this is the full realization of everything that happens in the covenant relationship. So remember, at the outset, Boaz says in verse 13 of chapter 3, "I will redeem you." That's what he's saying. If the other kinsman redeemer won't redeem you, I will redeem you. And in actuality, what we get with Boaz is this: he wants to redeem. He desires to redeem. Now, again, let me make sure we're really clear in this. Have we seen anywhere in the text that Boaz says, "Man, oh man, that's the most beautiful woman I've seen. This is love at first sight. I want her"?
No.
We've never seen that. So do we see Boaz as this Hayil, this mighty man of valor, this man of courage who actually is being obedient to the covenant promise?
Yes.
Yes. So the foundation of this, and I want to make sure this is really clear, the foundation of this is his love for God. The foundation of ultimately what this is going to be for Ruth is her love for God. Now, the outpouring of that is Ruth loves Naomi. The outpouring of that is Boaz loves Ruth and Naomi, but it's born out of this incredible love and obedience to the God of the universe. So we're going to start in verses 1 and 2, and we're going to look at the setup. This is Boaz now coming to bear to make this actually happen because he has the desire to make it happen. And we're going to make some spiritual parallels here in just a minute. So let me read 1 and 2. Now Boaz, now remember this is now on the basis of Ruth and Naomi are resting to allow the Redeemer to do the work. And this is, remember 2 weeks ago we stopped this and we finally said, way to go, Naomi. You're actually now who we've always wanted you to be, one who has placed your faith and your trust in the kinsman-redeemer, in God's provision for you. So now Boaz went up to the gate and sat down there, and behold, the close relative of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So Boaz said, come aside, friend, sit down here. So he came aside and sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, sit down here. So they sat down. Now, here's the setup. Notice that Boaz comes immediately down from the threshing floor the next morning and goes immediately to the front gate. Any idea why? Why the front gate?
That's where the decisions were made.
That's where the decisions. In fact, I put it this way. If you've ever driven through small Texas towns, what's in the center of the town?
Courthouse.
The courthouse, where all of the business takes place. The front gate is where everybody passed through to do business in the town. And so the front gate is where you sat down to actually conduct the business of the day. It was the town center. So he comes actually down from the threshing floor and goes back up because the city gate was always an elevated place in the city. You went up to the front gate. So he sits down and look at what he does. He waits. And he waits not because he's lazy, he waits because at some point in time, the other close relative is going to come by the gate. And what he does is he sets this up beautifully. He waits in a specific spot for the close relative to come by. When the close relative finally comes by, he sets him in a specific place. Come sit here. Then he looks at 10 elders of the city who are the ones who are going to witness what's getting ready to happen, and he places them in a very specific place. You guys come sit here. This is almost like the old business practice that if somebody came into your room and you were going to negotiate with them, you elevated your chair and had them sit on the other side of the desk and lower, so you always look down at them. Okay, so he is setting the stage for him to be the one who wins this negotiation. But it's an interesting point because he not only tells him to sit down, they're at the gate, the place of business, sit down, but then he says this to him, come aside, friend, and sit down here. Now, there's something really significant about that word friend. Notice that everybody in here has a name. Elimelech, Naomi, Ruth, Mahlon, Chilion, Orpah. Everybody has a name, and yet here is the closer relative. He doesn't call him by name. He calls him friend. If you go back in the rabbinical scholarship, the word that's actually used here that we translate as friend actually translates to, we would translate it this way, come sit here, John Doe. Literally what he's saying is, come sit here, no name.
No, yeah.
He is not even acknowledging the close relative by putting his name out there. He doesn't even give us his name. We're going to find out in just a minute why, but I can give you the background on this, and that is that Boaz, as I've said before, knows the character of this Goel. He knows the character of this close relative. So he sits him down, puts him at the right spot, puts him at the right place, has the 10 men there as the legal witnesses to what's getting ready to take place, and he has this sit down. So he's got everything prepped and in place. Now, I want to tell you that the first sit down that ever occurred happened in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. Genesis chapter 3, verse 15 says this. God says, and I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. The first sit down was between God and Satan. And God set it up so that he would win. Here's what I'm going to do, Satan. I'm going to put this enmity, I'm going to put this disagreement, I'm going to put this estrangement between the offspring of my creation and your offspring. And here's what's going to happen. I'm going to put my own son in the middle of that. And my own son is going to voluntarily allow his heel to be bruised in order to use his heel to crush your head. This is the first gospel presentation ever. It's called the Evangelion. It is the first gospel presentation. And the interesting thing is it's a gospel presentation given from God to Satan. And notice in this gospel presentation, there is no opportunity for Satan to have a response. Because what Satan has done, there is no opportunity for Satan to respond. So what we get is in this first setup, it's really obvious that what God wanted to do was win. And if you look to the person to your left and the person to your right, that's who God wanted to win for. He wanted to win for you. And so he says back in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, I'm going to set this up so that my son will ultimately crush you. That's the first time of the good news that he will expose his heel voluntarily to be bruised while he then bruises your head, and it will be a fatal blow. So we get this wonderful setup. He's got him sitting down. He's put him on notice by calling him no name. He has brought the 10 men in to be a part of this, and now the strategy is going to unfold. And it's just a brilliant strategy to set this guy up and show off his character. How many of you have ever fly fished? Look at all the hands going up. We got one. How many of you have ever seen fly fishing? How many of you have heard the words fly fishing? Okay, we got everybody in the room. Let me tell you, there's a difference between fly fishing and regular cast fishing. Regular cast fishing is you bait the hook and you let it drop down deep. Fly fishing, you put what's called a fly on the end of your line. It's a very lightweight, looks like a fly with a hook in it, and you cast it and it sits up on top of the water, and you actually have it dance on the water so the fish thinks it's a fly coming on top of the water and jumps up to get it. Well, the strategy points that Boaz is going to lay out here is actually a beautiful rendition of what fly fishing is all about. And there are 4 parts to fly fishing. The first part is this. You have to put a fly on your line and cast it. You actually have to throw it out onto the water. So here's the first strategy point. Now listen to it in verse 3. Then Boaz said to the close relative, Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, sold the piece of land which belonged to our brother Elimelech. And I thought to inform you, saying, buy it back in the presence of the inhabitants and the elders of my people. If you'll redeem it, redeem it. If you'll not redeem it, then tell me, that I may know, for there is no one but you to redeem it, and I'm next after you. So here's the first thing he does. He baits the hook. He puts the fly on the line. He casts it out on the water. What he says to the close relative is this. All right, no name. There is this piece of land that's been a part of our family. And the scholarship, actually, the rabbinical scholarship says either the piece of land was sold by Naomi to keep her fed in Moab, or it was about to be sold, or it had previously been sold and needed to be redeemed. But the Levirate marriage says you redeem not only the land, but the people. So the first thing he puts out there is this. Naomi has a field. Now remember, the famine's over. This is good, rich land. There is good harvested field out there. And it belonged to your family. So this land, this opportunity is there. And this means a lot to the close relative, because if he is to redeem this land, if he's to buy this land, his land increases. And I'm telling you that the status of a landowner then was really big, because he could put crops on it, he could put animals on it, he could increase that, and this is a very attractive offer. So he baits the hook, he throws it out there, and all he said to him so far is, there's land, and it's yours. Notice what he's done. He's just put the bait out on the water. There is land, and it's yours. Now, what has he not mentioned yet?
Ruth and Naomi.
There's a string attached here. All he's done is he said there's land, and it's yours. You have first right of refusal on this land. This is a very attractive offer. So the land is here. I've made no mention of anything else that's going to follow, but the land is here. It's yours. So now he's going to entice him. He's going to kind of dance the fly on the water and entice him. So what he says is, there is no one, the end of verse 4, if you will redeem it, redeem it. Tell me that you're going to redeem it. If not, tell me, for there is no one else to redeem it, and I'm next after you. So now I'm going to motivate you a little bit. And I'm going to tell you that the land is yours, but if you don't want it, I'll take it. Well, if it's just going to sit there, there's no motivation. But if he says there's another active buyer here, and by the way, the buyer is me, I'm the next closest relative. If you don't want the land, I want it. Boy, does he entice him. He entices him to take the bait. And the interesting thing is, he takes the bait, because at the end of verse 4, the close relative says, I'll redeem it. Almost instantaneously, he says, I got it. I want it. I want the land. So this is strategy point number 3. He now takes that fly and he begins to run. And any fly fisherman will tell you the minute the fish bites that fly, he takes and he begins to run, because the fish doesn't have any understanding that there's an actual hook inside this fly. Well, Boaz is getting ready to expose the hook. So the strategy point is, he's got the hook, he takes the bait, he runs with it because he says, I will redeem it. Now look at verse 5. Boaz said to him, on the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also buy it from whom?
Ruth.
Now look what he calls her.
Yeah.
Now let me just ask you a question. In the storyteller, we've looked at how many different names that Ruth has. Has Boaz ever called her the Moabitess?
No.
No.
Boaz has always called her my daughter. He's always used terms of affection for her. Here, in front of this other Goel, he tries to make her as unattractive as possible.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, on the day that you buy the field, you've now said you're going to redeem it in front of all these witnesses here at the front gate. On the day that you're going to buy it from the hand of Naomi, you must also buy it from Ruth, the outcast, Ruth, the enemy, Ruth, the one no one wants, Ruth, the Moabitess, who also happens to be the wife of the dead, who also happens to be your relative, to perpetuate the name of the dead through his inheritance. There's a reason why you need to buy it from Ruth, because Ruth is in the family. She married into the family, so you have to perpetuate that name. And in order to do that, you've got to buy the land not only from Naomi, but you got to buy it back from Ruth as well. So now that he's taken the bait, all of a sudden the hook shows up inside this, and he realizes this fly has a hook in it. I don't know that I want this land. And there's a reason why he would potentially not, well, 2 reasons why he potentially doesn't want the land. First of all, he didn't want anything to do with Ruth. She's a Moabitess. But the second reason is, in a levirate marriage, what you were required to do was give the woman a child, preferably a son, who would then have to have a split of the inheritance. So what he would have to do is he would have to now split his inheritance among all of the children, and a huge portion of that inheritance has to go to this new one who's come into the family. So what we find is, it looks really attractive when it's a piece of land. Boy, I can grow this, I can do what I need to do, I can get new land, I can acquire more wealth. But wait a minute, attached to this is Ruth. And attached to that is, then I have to fulfill the covenant role of the levirate, and I have to now marry her, give her a child, and shove off a huge portion of the inheritance to that side of the family. This was a supreme sacrifice. And it's a sacrifice we're going to find in just a moment that he's not willing to go through. So in this strategy, we've now seen he's thrown the hook out there. We've seen him entice. Once he's got him on the hook, now he gives him the second half of this, and we find he's not going to want to do this. He's not going to want to make the sacrifice. And I want to throw just a question out there. The question is this: was Christ willing to make the sacrifice for us?
Yes.
Was Christ willing to do whatever was necessary to redeem us?
Absolutely.
You begin to see a little bit of the parallels of the kinsman-redeemer now with Christ, and it's going to come full circle here in just a minute. So Boaz had this strategy. He set the room up beautifully. He put the strategy in place, and now comes the sacrifice. Listen to what the close redeemer says. Verse 6. Now remember, he's already said, I'm going to take the land. I got it. I want it. I want the land. But now that we put Ruth in the mix, verse 6, the close relative said, I cannot redeem it. I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I ruin my own inheritance. You redeem my right of redemption for yourself, or I cannot redeem it. Now let's be real honest here. Could he redeem it?
Yeah.
Could have.
Could have. Did he want to redeem it?
No.
And
No,
for
it's
that
totally
reason,
somewhere else.
for that reason, he says, I can't. In actuality, he won't. It looked really good because notice he still has only said, I can't redeem it. He has said nothing yet about I can't redeem her.
Right.
He's only said I can't redeem it. And we're going to go on here. He says, now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm anything, one man took off his sandal, gave it to the other, and that was confirmation. Verse 8, therefore the close relative said to Boaz, buy it for yourself. And he took off his sandal. What's he still talking about?
The land.
The land. This guy still has made no reference to the wonderful blessing that, by the way, we as the hearers of the story now know the incredible character of Ruth. We've seen a Hayil in Boaz and a Hayil in Ruth. God has brought them together. This is a beautiful telling of this tale of who knows whose character. Now all of a sudden we get the other relative. And by the way, let me just ask you this question. This relative was living in Bethlehem, right? He's in the same town.
Yes.
She's been gleaning in the field for 12 weeks. The whole town knows of her. And yet this close relative really doesn't want her, really doesn't understand who it is, doesn't understand a levirate marriage. Can we say this is a close relative who wasn't walking really closely with God?
Yes.
He's not there. He's put all of that behind him. And even this, he's only looking out. He is only looking out for what benefits him. In fact, let me phrase it this way. He's only going to obey if it benefits him. Let me ask a real convicting question. Is that me? Do I only obey the Lord when it benefits me? Yeah. I'm going to take a real deep breath on that one and just let that one hover for just a minute. So in the sacrifice that's here, what we find is over and over again, the close relative says, I can't, I'm not able. He's really saying, I will not obey the covenant promise, the covenantal law, not because I can't, but because I won't. I'm not willing to make that sacrifice. The beautiful statement here then is, as was custom, and you can go back to Deuteronomy and see this custom. You can actually go back to Joshua and see this custom. They would sit down and they would hand the sandal over, like giving them the keys to the house. So if you close on a house, what happens at that table after you signed all the documents? They hand you the key. So here what they did was they handed a sandal. And there's incredible scholarship on what that actually means, but my favorite part of the scholarship means this. The removal of the sandal and the handing of the sandal means everywhere this sandal has been is now yours.
Oh.
So the giving of the sandal was, and what it really means is that the close relative actually walked the land and now is saying that land, though it is legally mine to take, I'm taking my sandal off and saying every place this sandal is walked, Boaz, is now yours to take.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Now, notice in this conversation what's happened. Do you want the land? Yes, I want it. In front of 10 elders of the city. Do you want the land? Yes, I want it. Oh, by the way, you got to have Ruth the Moabitess with you. Oh, I can't do that. I back down. He pulls away from, and it becomes very well known. His character comes to the surface. He's not willing to make the sacrifice. He's not willing to be obedient to the covenant promise. He's not willing to be in that relationship. He's not willing to redeem. He's not willing to fulfill any of this because it doesn't benefit him. And so he takes off his sandal and he gives it to Boaz and says, here, what I have is yours. You take this. It's yours. Now, I have an interesting visual for you. So they're all sitting at this place at the front gate. When he gives his sandal over to Boaz and gets up and leaves, just have a visual image there for just a moment. What's he walking away without?
A shoe.
A shoe.
Property.
So when he walks away without a shoe,
Limping.
what's he look like when he's walking through the town?
Yeah, limping.
He's limping. One sandal, one barefoot. And I will tell you, friends, everybody in the town watches him walk through the town knowing he did not make the sacrifice. Now, I want to fast forward to you. Resurrection, upper room, Thomas. I will not believe until I put my fingers in the holes, my hand in his side. Here is the kinsman-redeemer who walks through town barefoot. It's an obvious sign of what he was willing not to do. We have the beautiful image of Jesus Christ with the holes in his hands and feet, and the spear mark in his side. The obvious elements of the sacrifice he was willing to go to for you and for me. And when Christ walks in front of us and we see the holes in his hands, we see, as a matter of fact, the beautiful story about Thomas is this. He doesn't even put his hands in. The minute he sees it, he drops to his knees and he says, I believe. This is the beauty of what Christ did. He bears on himself the evidence of the sacrifice he was willing to make so that we could be redeemed. Isn't that a beautiful picture? The fun part of this is, do we ever hear this guy's name again? We never hear
We
his
never
name.
heard it anyway. Yeah.
He truly is a no-name. He's a no-name forever. And his character comes to the forefront. So we get this wonderful picture of this beautiful sacrifice that was made. The beautiful sacrifice that was made from Boaz, because Boaz now gets to walk through town holding the sandal. The evidence that he has redeemed Naomi, Elimelech, Mahlon, Chilion, the family, the land, and Ruth, the outcast. He has redeemed it all and was willing to make that sacrifice. Have you ever heard of the Iditarod, the dog sled race? You've heard of the Iditarod? Do you know how the Iditarod got started? Well, let me just take 2 minutes and tell you the story of how the Iditarod got started. Back in 1926, in the town of Nome, Alaska, there was a little 6-year-old boy. His name was Richard Stanley. And Richard Stanley showed symptoms of diphtheria. Now, the unfortunate thing of diphtheria today was there really wasn't much of an antidote, and if diphtheria actually caught on, it was infectious to the point that it could have wiped out an entire town. There was a small town doctor, his name was Curtis Welch, and he had come up with what he thought was a good immunization, and he started to immunize several of the children to great success. Richard Stanley, the little 6-year-old boy, passed away, which was the confirmation that it was diphtheria. Well, Dr. Welch ran out of, very quickly, the serum for this immunization. And the next nearest place where he could have it actually manufactured was 1,000 miles away by dog sled. Thus the name the Iditarod. Well, what ended up happening was all of the different mail carriers and their dog sleds determined that they would meet each other halfway, all the way from Nome to pick up the medicine and bring it back. It was 144 hours of straight dog sledding, one team after another, in 50 below weather. The sacrifice that each of these dog sled riders made to get the medicine back, which actually saved the entire town, and only the little boy, he was the only one that passed away. The sacrifice that was made was incredible to save a town. We look at the sacrifice that Jesus Christ made to save you and me, to actually save the world. It's a wonderful parallel that we get in what we see going all the way back to the Book of Ruth, the foreshadowing of Jesus Christ, our kinsman-redeemer. We see Boaz willing to make that sacrifice to save Mahlon, Chilion, Elimelech, Naomi, Ruth, to save the family, the legacy, and what we will see next week, to save the entire line of Jesus Christ. It's just an incredible ending. So now we have this wonderful story in the setup, in all that's happened to come up into this actual transaction that takes place. And now we get the seal. One of my favorite parts in this entire book is what now happens. Listen to what the witnesses say in verses 9 and 10. And Boaz said to the elders and all the people, "You are witnesses this day that I have bought, redeemed, all that was Elimelech's, all that was Chilion's, all that was Mahlon's, from the hand of Naomi." Verse 10, moreover, Ruth, who?
The Moabitess.
Let's make sure that we really understand. She is Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon. Listen to what he says. I have acquired her as what?
My wife.
My wife. To perpetuate the name of the dead through his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brethren and from his position at the gate. You are witnesses this day. So what he sets down is, now you all are witnesses. These 10 elders, you are witnesses to the legal transaction that has occurred, but you're also witnesses to my desire, to what I desired to do. I desired to redeem the house of Elimelech. I desired to redeem the house of Chilion, the house of Mahlon. I desired to redeem Naomi and all the land. Now he says, I've bought the land. But notice he doesn't say, I bought Ruth. He does not use her as property. He actually says, in this transaction, I have acquired her. I have obtained her. But look at then what he does with her. He says, I have obtained her to be from the Moabitess to my wife. But just think about this for a moment. He is now placed in front of the entire witnesses of this town that someone who is an enemy, an outcast, a servant, a widow, the lowest of the low, has now been moved to the status of the wife of the most prestigious man in town. Now, just ask yourself the question, if you're Ruth, what are you thinking right now?
Wow.
Would you like to be dancing on the tables at this present moment? And here's the reason I ask you that question, because Jesus Christ said the same thing about you. I have just taken you from the lowest of the low and brought you up to this status. You are one of mine. And you are one of mine. And notice, where's Ruth? Where is she right now? Is she at the gate? Is she negotiating? Is she in the middle of this? No, she's back at home. Has she done anything to make this transaction happen? She hasn't bought it. She hasn't earned it. Nothing. This has all happened because they finally said, this is the work of the Goel, the work that only the Redeemer can do. And we get the chance to be in the midst of the family of God by the virtue of the work of the goel. Yeah, you can push your tables back, push your chairs back and dance because we're Ruth. We are Ruth that has been redeemed by the kinsman-redeemer through no effort of our own. We have been placed at a very, very high level because of the work of Jesus Christ. And the witnesses around, this is really cool. The witnesses around, they've got this incredible job to do. But before I get to the witnesses, let me just make sure we understand exactly what Boaz has done. The first thing he did was he showed his interest. He had an interest not only in the land, but he had more of an interest in the people. Yes, I bought the land back, but here's what I did for the people. I have regained the status for Mahlon and Chilion. I've regained the legacy for Elimelech. I have brought Naomi back food and children now. Remember, go all the way back to chapter 1. What did you have to survive? Food and children. He has brought that in, and I have elevated Ruth from the lowest of the low to my wife. His care was for the people. That was his interest. His intention was, he makes it known, his intention was to perpetuate the name and the legacy of that family, because that was what was required of the kinsman-redeemer. He's following the covenant law to the letter. And then third, I'll tell you, this is also, I call this the invisible factor. We don't hear from No Name again, do we? But in this laundry list of people he's just named, Elimelech, Chilion, Mahlon, Naomi, and Ruth, who else do we not hear? Orpah. We don't hear Orpah's name again. Because remember, Orpah went back. Mm-hmm. She did not return to the land of blessing. She went back. These are the abundant blessings that come upon those who are in the family. God said, don't leave the land. Stay in the land. The blessing's in the land. We know that the blessing is in Christ. Mm-hmm. And that's where the blessing occurs. So we get this beautiful statement of all of the abundant blessing. And here's what Boaz does. Boaz looks at it and says, hey, friends, I got the land. I got the girl. I got the family. I redeemed the name. I got the legacy. I perpetuated all of this. And I did it simply by being obedient, and God blessed me and blessed me and blessed me and blessed me and blessed me time and time again. Wow. This is a guy I want to meet. I'm just here to tell you, he's going to be one of those when the time comes and I stand before the Lord. I want to meet Boaz. This is an incredible guy. So he redeems everything. He seals the deal with the sandal. He tells everybody this is what is going on. And he says the redemption is complete. Let me take you to John chapter 3. If you got a Bible there, turn to John chapter 3. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Chapter 3 comes immediately after chapter 2.
And before 4.
And before 4. Very good. I like that. Now, most of us know John 3:16. But I want to read 16 through 21 because, excuse me, most of us don't read past John 3:16. 3:16 says, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. Amen? Verse 17, for God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. Verse 18, he who believes in him is not condemned, but he who does not believe is condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. He's condemned because of unbelief. Mm-hmm. Verse 19, and this is the condemnation. Here is what that condemnation looks like. That the light has come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. Verse 20, for everyone practicing evil hates the light, and does not come to the light, lest his deeds should be exposed. My favorite part, verse 21, but he who does the truth comes to the light, that his deeds may be clearly seen that they have been done in God. Who here is walking in the light?
Boaz. Yeah.
Boaz is walking in the light. Was Ruth walking in the light?
Yes.
Did she make her intentions plain and clear?
Yes.
Boaz
Yes.
made his intentions plain and clear. They both obeyed. They both followed. And they are walking in the light. And these are the deeds done in God. What God does is he blesses over and over and over and over because of the work of his Son, because of belief in the work of his Son. Notice here that it is all on the basis of belief. Notice here he doesn't say he who walks in the light is the one who does all of these magnificent works. It's the one who believes. And what we get is this beautiful picture of Boaz walking in the light and the abundant blessings that come upon him. It's just an incredible picture. And what we ultimately see is that the two that don't walk in the light are not a part of this blessing. No name is nowhere to be found. Orpah is never heard from again. There's getting ready to be a prophetic statement made on this, and you're going to see the fullness of this in just a minute. So here come the witnesses. My other favorite part of the end of this. And listen to what the witnesses do, and I'm going to ask you the question, and as I read through this, I want you to think about yourself. What are we called upon as witnesses to do? Verse 11, and all the people who were at the gate, so now it's not just the elders, it's everybody who's gathered around. So there's now a crowd that's gathered around the gate. All the people who are at the gate and the elders said, we are witnesses. The Lord made the woman who is coming to your house, Boaz, like Rachel and Leah, the two who built the house of Israel, and may you prosper in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Verse 12, may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring which the Lord will give you from this young woman. And I wanted to just take a step back. There are five things the witnesses do. Five things the witnesses do. The first is that they affirm the legality of the transaction. This occurred. This transaction happened. Second, they're witnesses to the redemptive work of what Boaz has done for Naomi and Ruth and Mahlon and Chilion and Elimelech. So they witness the redemptive work that's happened. Third, they're the blessing bestowers. They're the ones who bestow blessing on Boaz and Ruth. Fourth, they are, in a way, they're prophets telling the reader of what is to be fulfilled in the lives of Boaz and Ruth. We're going to talk about that in just a second. And fifth, they are for prayers. They are the prayers on behalf of Boaz and Ruth. Now, I want you to think about it. As you share Christ, as you tell people about Jesus, as you are a witness to someone else's life in Christ, their growth in Christ, do you fulfill any of these roles as a witness? Do you confirm for somebody Christ at work in their life? Are you an eyewitness to the redemption of what Christ is redeeming in the life of another? Are you a blessing? And do you bestow that blessing on the lives of others? As a witness, do you tell the reader of what Christ is fulfilling in their lives? And finally, are you one who prays specifically for those that you are in relationship with, those that you are discipling, those that you are sharing the gospel with, those that you are talking to about Jesus? It's a beautiful picture of what we can do as witnesses. We think in terms of evangelism in this very, very tiny, constrictive circle. I can only share the gospel. Well, witnesses fulfill a tremendous number of roles in the lives of each other. Are you witnesses one to another of Christ in your lives? Let me rephrase that question. Are you witnesses one to another of Christ in your lives? The answer to that is absolutely. So as you look at this, just this group right here, imagine what happens to this group as you are witnesses of Christ in each other's lives. Do you pray for one another? Yes. Do you tell one another of what Christ is fulfilling? And do you keep the fulfillment of Christ? We talked about it in the whole last study, the 33 divine gifts of grace. Do you keep putting those in front of each other? Do you bestow blessing on each other? Are you eyewitnesses to the redemptive work that Christ has done and continues to do in your lives? Do you confirm for one another that Christ is at work, that the Holy Spirit's at work doing the work? It's the beauty that we get the privilege of doing that work in the lives of one another. And I'll get off my soapbox now and continue, but there's just this marvelous connection that God gives us as witnesses to each other in each other's lives. So we're called on to do that. Now I want you to see, as we conclude this, I want you to see what these witnesses do for Ruth. They're talking to Boaz because Ruth is not here yet, but look at the blessing they bestow on Ruth. We're witnesses, verse 11, and the Lord, who gets the credit for this? The Lord, make the woman who is coming to your house, and we could put in parentheses here, by the way, Ruth the Moabitess, may he make her like Rachel and Leah, the two who built the house of Israel. Now just think about this for a moment. Rachel and Leah are on this pedestal, probably along with Sarah, in the history of the nation of Israel. You get Rachel and Leah, the two that were barren to start, and then all of a sudden God opens their wombs and they start having children, and the 12 tribes of Israel are formed out of their children. Rachel and Leah, the two matriarchs of the nation of Israel. What have these witnesses just said about Ruth?
They want her to be like them. Mm-hmm.
You like them?
Wow!
Yeah.
May this outcast who is now yours, who is coming to your house, may she be like the foundational women of the nation of Israel.
Mm.
Now just think back for a moment to chapter 1 where she makes the commitment to Naomi. I will go where you go. I will lodge where you lodge. I will be with you. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. The fulfillment of that is right here. And it's given to her not by Boaz, it's given to them by the witnesses. The witnesses say, may this woman who comes into your house, may the Lord make her of this caliber. May the Lord put her on this same plateau, on this same level. I think it's fascinating to note that when you move forward to the Gospel of Matthew, who's in the lineage of Jesus Christ? Ruth. Ruth is actually named in the lineage of Jesus Christ, written in the Gospels in the New Testament. We have been talking about her for how long? Thousands of years.
Yeah.
And listen to the fulfillment of this prophecy. May she be to your house like Rachel and Leah, the two who built the house of Israel, and may you prosper. You know what that word is, prosper? That's the same word we used before of Boaz and of Ruth. It's the word hayil. May you hayil, may you prosper, may you be great in valor, may prosperity be there. But prosperity is the prosperity of character. That's what he's talking about. That's what the witnesses are talking about here. May there be this prosperity of character for you in Ephrathah, and may you be famous in Bethlehem. Has that come true?
Mm.
Do we know Bethlehem for something other than the work of Ruth and Boaz?
Yes.
Yes.
Christ.
That's right. It is the birthplace of Christ. And so we get this wonderful prophetic statement about their character, and not only their character, but the place where all this takes place. And we're going to see that lineage, especially when we look at next week at the very end of this. We're going to see the lineage through David and ultimately Christ. So we get this beautiful picture of the Abrahamic covenant coming into play. We get this beautiful picture of, do we think Ruth is now redeemed?
Yes.
She's been placed with Rachel and Leah. She's been placed up there at the top. And he goes on, the witnesses go on and say, may your house, Boaz, be like the house of Perez, who Tamar bore to Judah. Now let's talk about Judah for just a moment. Who is Christ called? The Lion of
Judah.
We get this beautiful statement that's made to Boaz now, that may your house be like the house of Judah. May just this marvelous transition of who has come out, how Israel started, everything that happened here, and may you prosper, may you hayil, may the combination of your two characters come together, and may it prosper throughout all of Israel. This is the beauty here. In fact, if you go back to Jeremiah 29:11, God says, I have a plan to do what with you?
Prosper.
And here's the fascinating part. Yeah, I have a plan to prosper you. Here's the fascinating part. We look at that word prosper and we think, oh God, what you're going to do is you're going to bring abundance to me of things around me. You're going to prosper my life. No, what he's talking about here is I have a plan to make you a hayil.
Yeah.
That's what prosper is talking about. I have a plan to make you a person of valor, a person of character, a person of significance because you belong to me. Wow. What an absolutely beautiful, beautiful statement. And concludes this, which the Lord will give you from this young woman. Now, we know that food is now promised, but what has God now just promised ultimately to Naomi? There's also going to be children. There's going to be a legacy. There's going to be a continuation. Has God been faithful or what?
Very much so.
It's just unbelievable what has happened in this. And we see ultimately that's the incredible significance of what's here. I would ask the question as we look at this, the unfolding of the spiritual heritage that occurs through Boaz and Ruth in them redeeming the legacy of Elimelech and Mahlon and Chilion and Naomi. And I would ask the question of us, what's our spiritual, what's our spiritual heritage? What are we leaving into the people that we know? What are we leaving in our families, the spiritual heritage? Can we look back and see that spiritual heritage coming forward? And what are we leaving here that the next generations will take with them? What is that spiritual heritage and how does that move forward? So, in summary, let me just talk about a couple of things real quick. Boaz knew the significance of winning. I'm not talking about win at all costs. What the world says win at all costs is about. He knew the significance of winning this scenario because he knew he was winning for God. He knew he was what he was redeeming. The redemption of Ruth and Naomi and Mahlon and Chilion and Elimelech and generation after generation after generation to come. And the witnesses say that. This is what you're doing. He knew the significance. And he knew the significance so well that he set up the negotiation. After the setup, he had a strategy. He knew what it was about. He knew what he had to accomplish. He made the sacrifice of the inheritance, and he sealed the deal. Told the whole world, this is what I have done. And I love the fact that he did this back in chapter 3, verse 13. If the other Goel will not do this, I will redeem you. And it's as if Jesus says to us, the world tells you that it can redeem you. Don't listen to it. Because the only one who can redeem is the one who understands the significance of that redemption in your life. That when he redeems you to be one of his. The significance of that winning, when Christ went to the cross, he had one thing in his mind. Obedience to the Father means you come to me. Friends, it's an incredible statement about what's here. The incredible statement about what the Goel did through the person of Boaz for Ruth, Naomi, Mahlon, Chilion, Elimelech. The significance of that, we're still seeing the result of that today. Because the significance of that, as we'll see next week as we conclude this whole thing, the significance of that is that you all are sitting at that table right there, having trusted in Jesus Christ. And had not this occurred, had Boaz not been willing to do what the kinsman-redeemer had to do, just think of the consequences. Had that not occurred, and Boaz and Ruth not gotten together. If that hadn't occurred, by the way, the line of Christ ends.
Mm-hmm.
Right here. The line of Christ ends. Right here. And yet what God does in his infinite grace, in his infinite mercy, is he brings Boaz and the outcast Ruth together and has this beautiful picture of what Christ did for us. I want to ask you a favor this week. Reflect on what the Goel has done for you. Reflect on the sacrifice. Reflect on the significance of what he has done for you. And review back over what Boaz did for Ruth. Reflect on the status, what the status change in your position. Reflect on his sacrifice. It's rather humbling to think through all that Christ has done for us. And the foreshadowing of that comes to us in the person of Boaz in this little book. Questions, thoughts, comments. That's covering a whole lot of ground, let me tell you.
This is the most beautiful thing we've gotten into yet. Beautiful. My opinion.
There will be a really fun thing we'll look at next week, and that is everything that she lost in the first 5 verses. In the last 5 verses, she gains. Everything for Naomi, everything gets redeemed. And we'll take a look at that next week. Any other thoughts, questions? I know, Diane, you've got to get out of here, but yes.
I got 8 minutes.
This is just going back to a comment that you made earlier when you were talking about Genesis 3:15.
Yes.
And you said the offspring of Satan's creation versus the offspring of God's creation. And could you expand on that just a minute? It's just the way that it hit me of Satan's creation versus.
Yeah, let me make that a little more clear. When Satan rebelled, he took a third of the angels with him. That's a part of that offspring. The other part of that offspring are all the people that have been influenced by Satan and will ultimately be influenced by Satan not to follow Christ. So what God is setting up here is that the offspring of the seed of the woman, who will ultimately be Christ, there is enmity between you and Christ. And what will happen is everybody that follows you will lose. Everybody that follows Christ will win. That's and I'm using that term offspring loosely. Satan didn't give birth to all of this, and that's not his creation, but these are ones who have chosen to follow him. So it's his family line, if you will. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yes.
Sure.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Great question.
I was just struck in this story, and you've taught it so well, of how relevant this ages-old story is to what life is today. We meet the same problems. We have the same problems. Maybe not in that Jewish culture, obviously, but still, it's a story for today, and it means as much to us and can mean as much to us in the solutions of today's problems as it was then.
That's a great comment. One of the things that I usually tell, and you'll hear me say this next week, I think Ruth is perhaps the most relevant Old Testament book to us today. And it's relevant in a number of different ways. We're going to see it next week in the conclusion of all this. But yes, we can learn incredible lessons that hopefully we've learned throughout this book about obedience to Christ, following God, all of the things that Ruth and Boaz do correctly and Naomi doesn't do. But I think there's another thing that's a huge element to us. And I said it earlier, and I'll say it again. If the book of Ruth doesn't happen,
Yeah.
we're not here. We're not sitting at this table. This was without the magnificence of the parting of the Red Sea or any of the magnificent things that had happened up to this point in this relatively insignificant story. We're going to see that the offspring now is David. And we'll connect next week the Abrahamic covenant to the Davidic covenant. The offspring of that is ultimately Christ. And if Ruth and Boaz don't get together, by the way, by coincidence, then we're not sitting at this table with our eternity secured.
Right.
Yeah, for me, it's one of the most significant little books in the Old Testament, if not the most.
Mark, can I ask you, did when the Jewish parents told I'm not talking about just the first 5 books of the Bible, I'm talking about would David and his family would they have told the story of Ruth and Boaz to the people, to their children?
Yep.
They would have done that, right?
Absolutely. And I think for me, there's a huge element of them oral tradition was everything.
Yes, yes.
And there were part of the tradition of the rabbis was to learn these stories. And if you remember, just think about it for a moment. A child of the Jewish faith was required to memorize the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Now, just think about that for a minute. You had to memorize the first 5 books. Imagine Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. How many of you want to memorize Leviticus?
Or Numbers.
Or Numbers. Or the law in Deuteronomy. But that was required for as young as 13. You're starting to memorize books of the Bible. So the tradition of the oral storytelling was really significant in the day, because even back in those days, there were no computers, there were no pens, there was not notebook paper that we take for granted. None of that existed back then.
No Google, no nothing.
Yeah. So the retelling of the stories time and time again, one of the traditions of the nation was faithfully recounting stories. And when you think about Psalm 91, David actually says in Psalm 91, he repeats exactly what Ruth says to Boaz. Would you spread your spread your wings over me? We see that repeated in Psalm 91.
Yeah, right.
David says exactly the same thing. So do I think that was told? I think the story of Ruth was told in household after household. And just think about it, in David's household, this is the lineage of his family, which we'll see in the last 5 verses of the book. This is where Boaz and Ruth give birth to Obed, who gives birth to Jesse, who gives birth to David. So three generations removed, David's still telling the wonderful story of Ruth and Boaz.
Well, and last night in BSF, we had just finished 2 Samuel 20, all the rest of chapter, but I thought so much of the thing we just went through today, where Boaz said, well, I will do it. At the very end, chapter 24, verse 24 and 25, was the scene where David wanted to buy the threshing floor where the temple was going to be built, although he didn't know that. But he said, I will surely buy it from you for a price, because I will not offer burnt offerings to the Lord my God, which cost me nothing. So he bought the threshing floor and the oxen for 50 shekels, and David built there an altar to the Lord and offered burnt offerings and the peace offerings. I just thought so much as you were going over this. And he also said, he knew that he that there was a lineage coming. God had promised a forever covenant with him.
Yes.
So all of that ties in so beautifully with this lesson today. Just beautiful to me.
Yeah. So when we get to next week and we look at these last verses and we take into consideration, now look at the span that has happened here. Go all the way back to Rachel and Leah,
Yeah.
through Tamar and Judah, up through Boaz and Ruth, on through Obed and Jesse. By the way, the root of Jesse, we see, we talk about those Old Testament prophecies, up through David, ultimately to Christ, and then ultimately to you and me. You want to talk about the relevance of an Old Testament book.
No kidding.
That's the relevance of this little 4-chapter book. And let's just make sure we're real clear. Nothing miraculous happens in this book.
Oh, me. Well, Tammy's here. She'll finish up with y'all.
Well, I think
by
we're
the
done.
way-
Unless there any questions, I think we're.
Are we coming for spring break? Spring break is next week. If y'all want to come and somebody wants to take my place, you can. I'm going to be out of town and I can watch it when
Do
I
we
get
need-
back.
Well, let's just see how many are here. Do we need to postpone a week, or what do we need to do?
I won't be here.
Postpone, they say. So
Okay.
we won't sign in next week.
We won't sign in next week. We'll postpone for a week and see you to close us out.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. You guys keep talking if you want to.
Bye, Diane.
Bye, y'all.
See ya.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay.
You bet. See you in 2 weeks.
Okay. Are y'all done then?
Yeah.
I'll turn
I
it
have
off.
a question, but I know you need to go.
Then
So,
you can ask Mark.
are you staying, Mark?
I can stay. I got about 3 or 4 minutes.
Okay, I was late today, but, I still do not understand why the close relative said no.
Understand
I
why?
don't get it.
I'm sorry. I didn't quite get the question.
Why the close relative said no.
He was just.
He said yes about the land. He said no
Yes.
about Ruth. Was he in love with somebody else?
No,
Was it an embarrassment that she was, a widow?
no.
Like,
There's
why did he say no?
2 reasons. The first is she's a Moabitess. She's an enemy. And the second reason, which is the more significant reason, is that in a levirate marriage, he would be required to marry her, to give her children. If there's a son, then he is required to split the inheritance with this other family line. It was a sacrifice he would have to split the inheritance totally, which takes the inheritance away from his own line. And so the sacrifice is there. And actually, if you want to make the spiritual connection, we all have an inheritance in Christ, don't we? And Christ is willing to split that inheritance with us all. So
And Mark, it was.
Yeah.
His inheritance was what he already had himself,
right,
not just what he would acquire, the land that he would acquire. It was what
right.
it was like separate property he already had, right?
It was not just the
Yeah.
inheritance of what he was going to, that's
Yeah.
right, not just the inheritance of what he was going to acquire. It was everything that he had would now have to be
Yeah.
split with, if she has children, which he was required to have children with her, so that family name would be perpetuated. Now he had to split his entire inheritance with that family line too, and he's not willing to do that. That help?
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
There was no prenups back then,
Yeah.
right?
Well, the Mosaic law.
Well, thank
Anything
you,
else?
Mark.
Thank you.
Okay. See you in 2 weeks.
Bye.